always on your side. Juneteenth, a celebration of freedom. Here is Ch.2's Mike Corbin.
Hello everyone, I'm Mike Corbin and welcome to Juneteenth, a celebration of freedom. On this, the 25th anniversary of Juneteenth in Buffalo, this is indeed a celebration of African American culture and heritage that's so rich in Western New York. This is also a celebration of people and the incredible stories that need to be shared. Let's begin now with the story of Juneteenth.
Juneteenth began in Texas, but there's a story behind that. 1863, Emancipation Proclamation is signed. Many folks, of course, don't have the luxury of having a communication like we do, and it took a while for it to reach certain parts of states that were still having slavery. Many soldiers were dispatched to different places to spread the word. And by the time that one particular soldier reached Texas, a year and a half had lapsed. We also think that maybe some masters turned around and decided to withhold the information so they can get an extra crop in. But by the time it reached Texas, we started celebrating. Blacks started celebrating. Slavery was over. June the 19th. And that's why we celebrate June 19th. Juneteenth festival in Buffalo is Buffalo. It is the community of Buffalo. It is the community of Buffalo pulling together and showing the artifacts, or showing what we can do as a people. Our theme is striving to keep our tradition and our culture alive. And we have artifacts from Africa being showed at Juneteenth. We have music. We have games that we play from old African days. Drums, storytelling, and the music, and all that festivities. History is very important. Our youth needs to know how we got as far as we got. There's a lot of people who have died for the privileges that we now share and enjoy, and they need to know that. Not only for Juneteenth and Afro-Americans, but to all parties involved, because I see that a lot of history is not being shared like it should be in our culture and other cultures. And our youth needs to know that they need that foundation to know how they got where they are.
You and your family can enjoy this year's Juneteenth celebration on Saturday and Sunday, June 17th and 18th, in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Park on Best Street in Buffalo. Everyone is invited to attend. The Juneteenth celebration in Buffalo wasn't always held in the park. It started out on Jefferson Avenue. Channel 2's Esther Miller brings us the memories of those who enjoyed our area's first Juneteenth celebration.
It's a cool night, and you're inside the Anchor Bar. Belial Abdullah plays the soulful sounds of jazz, conjuring up memories of the first Juneteenth celebration in Buffalo more than 20 years ago.
I think it was really about a struggle in a way. Society had changed a lot. It was about remembering things of old.
The local Juneteenth was an idea that stemmed from a movement in the late 60s when members of the black community asked Saul Alinsky to help organize the BUILD organization. BUILD helped create a number of programs, including starting BUILD Academy. Documentary filmmaker Doug Ruffin says by 1976, the year of the bicentennial, organizers wanted to celebrate their accomplishments.
They didn't feel as if the bicentennial year was anything for them as African Americans to really be excited about, because they felt that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry and Nathan Hale, a lot of those guys supported slavery.
They wanted to put the celebration on Jefferson Avenue, home of the once thriving business district and the Apollo Theater. Well, since a riot in the late 60s, the Strip had deteriorated.
The members of the BUILD organization felt was if that they could use the Juneteenth festival as a kind of a vehicle to revitalize the Jefferson Avenue business districts. And what they would do is they would paint murals on a lot of those old and dilapidated buildings.
They called in community groups from around the region, and by June 26, 1976, Juneteenth jump-started with a parade of drill teams, bands, and even a king and queen.
Up and down, you could see just wall-to-wall black folks. Shaking hands, hugging each other, loving each other, saying, I haven't seen you in years. It's like one big family reunion.
Food of all types were available, also musical talent, playing to hundreds. Musician Belial Abdullah remembers sharing the love of music and history.
This music that we play here is part of a great legacy that dates back hundreds and hundreds of years ago. That's a very positive life force.
A life force that feeds the Juneteenth festivals of yesterday, today, and beyond. Esther Miller, Channel 2 News.
The Buffalo Juneteenth celebration continues to grow each year. It's now one of the largest in the Northeast. And while at Juneteenth, you'll learn that Western New York was a key stop for escaped slaves seeking freedom in Canada. Channel 2's Claudine Ewing shows us 3 local stops along the Underground Railroad.
They were free, leading normal lives in Africa until they arrived in America as slaves. In time, they escaped the bondage of slavery by means of the Underground Railroad. Western New York was part of the Freedom Trail, a popular hideaway, the basement of the Michigan Street Baptist Church. But there are other stops. Many of the runaway slaves made their way to Niagara County. Here in Newfane is Murphy Orchards. It was an actual working farm for the slaves during the late 1800s. It was also a place where many of the slaves found a place to hide. Go down 14 feet in this barn and you're in an 8 by 10 foot concealed room where slaves hid from bounty hunters. Owner Carol Murphy says children are amazed.
The whole thing meant nothing to them until they looked down in that hole in the ground. And you can just see in their eyes the whole story coming alive for them.
Freedom warriors Harriet Tubman and Josiah Henson likely stopped here. Artifacts left by slaves are being studied by archaeologists. This metal piece resembling an animal trap was likely a slave's wrist shackle. Griffin's Mills in southern Erie County had a stake in the Underground Railroad. This session house is where abolitionists debated. The Anti-Slavery Liberty Party held its first convention here.
They were gung-ho with their sentiments.
Cazenovia Creek runs behind the church. Slaves followed the waterway toward Canada. Stephanie McCormick's house down the road was a safe haven for slaves.
The fugitives are going to scoot up in there and get up in the attic.
They went from the cellar through a false ceiling in this closet to the attic. We climbed a ladder to see where the slaves hid from bounty hunters. It was a house leading to freedom.
It was a heroic happening on the part of both races. It was real heroics. I mean, imagine picking up and walking thousands of miles following the North Star to get to Canada. It was really pretty heroic.
Somebody help me!
Today there are reenactments of life on the Underground Railroad. On Buffalo's west side, a mural depicts a route to Canada.
The chain going from the ship connecting all the way to the border of the U.S. at the Niagara River, where the chain opens up.
In the end, there was freedom. Claudine Ewing, Channel 2 News.
Bus tours of local Underground Railroad sites will be offered at the Juneteenth Festival. The stories of African American history can really be told by looking at the faces of those who inspired change. As Channel 2's Esther Miller tells us, many of those people have ties to Western New York.
When slaves escaped to freedom from the South, many passed through Western New York to Canada with the help of people who lived in our area, like Harriet Tubman.
It's uncertain exactly how Harriet Tubman moved fugitive slaves across New York State into Canada. We do know that at some time she crossed at the suspension bridge in Niagara Falls, near where the Whirlpool Bridge is today. She lived for a time in St. Catharines, Ontario, which is right across the border, before moving on to her final home in Auburn, New York.
Spokesman Frederick Douglass lived to the east in Rochester. His eloquence was first noticed in a local church. These pews are preserved as part of that history here at the Frederick Douglass Museum in Rochester.
The newspapers highlight his presence. There again, they called him the presence of a majestic king, they called him there in the newspapers. And he sat on one of these pews. He moved here in 1847, as I said before, in September. By December, his newspaper was up and running. He left here in 1872 because his house was mysteriously burned down.
In 1895, Frederick Douglass died of a massive heart attack in Washington, D.C. In his will, he asked to be buried here at Mount Hope Cemetery. He said because the best 25 years of his life was here in Rochester. Mary Talbert lived in Buffalo, next to the Michigan Avenue Baptist Church, which still stands today. She entertained those like W.E.B. Du Bois. Her house, the site of influential debates.
Buffalo really can point to that spot next to the Michigan Avenue Church where the Talbert House stood as being a birthplace of the Niagara movement and subsequently the NAACP.
Other local influential names include Sojourner Truth and Ida B. Wells, who refused to move to the Negro section of a northern train.
She says in her book, "They threw me off the train, parasol and all." Ida B. Wells sued and won.
And all these local people influenced thousands of lives fleeing slavery in the South and changed the face of Western New York and America. Esther Miller, Channel 2 News.
The struggle for civil rights wasn't just a battle fought in the deep American South. The lines were also drawn here in Western New York, and one Buffalo organization led the charge in the effort to build opportunity for all. It was called BUILD, an acronym for Building Unity, Independence, Liberty, and Dignity, a uniquely Buffalo organization born of the civil rights era.
BUILD recognized in this city that there were a lot of agencies, organizations, places that employed people that weren't employing minorities.
Darrell Gator worked for BUILD in his earlier days. His dad, William Gator, was one of the group's pioneers. On this old interview, William Gator shares memories of the group founded in January of '67.
I think what BUILD's concern was that we, the BUILD organization, amassed enough strength and enough power to be able to negotiate on behalf of the African American community.
BUILD was about progress for blacks. If talking didn't work, the group held sit-ins, marches, and rallies.
I think one of the biggest things that the BUILD organization did employment-wise was to get an agreement with the merchants downtown to hire minorities as assistant managers and managers.
Douglas Ruffin also remembers BUILD. His dad, Doug Ruffin Sr., also worked for the organization.
A few organizations have tried it, but none have really accomplished what the BUILD organization has accomplished, I think for the simple fact that a lot of what BUILD has established is still in existence today.
One of the many legacies of the BUILD organization is the BUILD Academy, which was established in the late 1960s. It has graduated many students and continues to do so. BUILD also fought for job opportunities, held voter registration drives, fought racism, the gamut.
Because you don't really have a lot of organizations that will go out and advocate for anybody in terms of police brutality, in terms of affirmative action. You really don't have a lot of that out here today.
And that's what BUILD did.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The BUILD organization is no longer around today, but many members of the group are still with us. They say BUILD was an early and quite effective voice for the community. Members of a Buffalo community work to save a historic home and the treasures found inside. That's up next on Juneteenth, a celebration of freedom. And throughout our special, the sights and sounds of Juneteenth.
A little of this, a little of that, put it all together, make it all worthwhile.
Juneteenth is about black people celebrating life and love and freedom. Freedom.
Welcome back to Juneteenth, a celebration of freedom. An effort is underway to save and preserve a local piece of African American history. Channel 2 senior correspondent Rich Kelman takes us inside the former home of Jesse Nash Sr.
It's an unimposing structure right around the corner from a much more familiar building. The Michigan Street Baptist Church was a stop on the Underground Railroad, and George Arthur and Kevin Cottrell want to preserve the block around it.
We want this to be Buffalo's version of a colonial Williamsburg, the focal point of tourism in the city of Buffalo.
Their focus is not so much the church as the house. This is where the Reverend Jesse Nash Sr., the church pastor for 59 years, lived. The place where George and Kevin recently made an astounding discovery.
Mr. Arthur and myself, for the first time, walked into this building maybe about 3 months ago. And we were shaking, I was shaking, because we felt as though we walked into a time capsule.
Jesse Nash's study was just as he left it when he died in 1957. Pulpit Digest, an Urban League magazine from 1943 on the Negro and Radio, as the title had it.
I'm looking at the picture of Marian Anderson, who was denied to sing by the Daughters of the American Revolution. And if you look at this picture, he's got her in a frame that's got the American eagle above it. You know, he was doing the work of King before King came along.
Before the Urban League, before the NAACP, before most of us heard the word ecumenical.
They had to come to the churches. They had to come to the ministers. And those ministers were our leaders. And Reverend Nash was the leader of the leaders.
He was friends with Adam Clayton Powell Sr. He knew W.E.B. Du Bois. This was the sermon he delivered at the funeral of Mary Talbert's sister-in-law. Mary Talbert delivered the eulogy at the funeral of Harriet Tubman.
This letter here dates back to 1913, the National League of Urban Conditions among Negroes. This predates the Urban League. You know, if I took you up in the attic, you would just fall over.
In the attic, the spirit of St. Louis, a ride-on toy of the boy who is now a man who has donated his father's house for preservation.
Faith without works is empty. Long before these words became popular, he was ecumenical and he was multicultural.
He was all that, and this is where he worked. These are the things he touched. His story is here.
It has not been told, and we're late to the lunch, obviously, but the lunch is still being served, and we're going to serve it.
Kevin Cottrell and George Arthur believe the home of the Reverend Jesse Nash is the Darwin Martin House of the East Side.
It may actually be more interesting.
I think so. Well, I think so. I know so.
And someday soon, we may all be able to see for ourselves. Rich Kelman, Channel 2 News.
George Arthur and Kevin Cottrell have formed a not-for-profit corporation, and they hope to begin restoring the Jesse Nash House within the next year. Another place of history and learning is Buffalo's Langston Hughes Center. Since 1968, the arts have been the main focus, including classes on crafts, drumming, and cultural dance. They're teaching and sharing history across cultural lines.
Because how else do we begin common dialogue with each other if we don't know each other? And so one of the ways that how do you get to know each other is by knowing each other's history and taking part in the celebration of the history.
The center will continue to display the work of new artists like Toronto artist Danny Gale. Two old friends with a message for our young people. It's a touching story you won't want to miss when Juneteenth, a celebration of freedom, returns.
I've been here since I started walking, and I come every year, and it's just all getting together, having a good time, knowing our history.
What I like about this piece is that it represents unity. It represents unity of African people, African American people, and just human beings.
As we've seen, Juneteenth is more than just food, music, and fun. It's also about lessons learned. Two old friends want to teach our youth about the past to prepare them for the future. Here's Channel 2 senior correspondent Rich Kelman.
They've been pals for 20 years or so. Judson Price and Luther Burnett. Luther, a one-time probation officer. Judson, a retired school guidance counselor. Both founding members of the festival here. The two with beliefs in common.
Hard work, patience, save some of what you have. If you have to watch something grow, you'll almost automatically develop patience.
Judson grows a garden each spring.
Grapes, potatoes, tomatoes, okra, corn, everything. And my kids had a chance to see that. And the only problem I had is The stuff that I had came from the ground. The other stuff that they wanted came from the store.
The two friends learned about the more than century-old Juneteenth celebration on their own.
But we never studied that in school.
Oh, no, we picked that up on our own.
No. Unfortunately, they almost made us feel that the slaves were happy.
Oh, yeah. Well, you look at the old Hollywood movies. Take a look at Showboat.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
I cringe. Stuff like that.
And so this is what we want the kids to recognize. They can't even recognize because both of us remember we couldn't even sit in the front of the bus. 1954. This was after I was out of college. And it's hard to believe, but you talk to the kids nowadays, they just can't conceive that. Same thing with the sports. I went to see Jackie Robinson when I was a Cub Scout at the Offerman Stadium. He wasn't even in the pros. So, you know, history has changed a lot.
It may have changed, they say, but nobody should miss the lessons.
I want my kids and yours and everybody else to know that because we had no salary, we are now poorer than other people who had people working for them for free. And so these are the kinds of things that bother me. But education and voting, I really want all of my people to look at those and treat them seriously.
And these friends want younger friends to concentrate on the first one first. Take advantage of the kind of education many before them were denied. Rich Kelman, Channel 2 News.
Local school kids are learning Juneteenth lessons in an unusual way. Their story is next on Juneteenth, a celebration of freedom.
That's the most inspirational part, you know, the unity, just to see all the kids happy and, just to see the happy faces and the love, the unconditional love. That's what I love best about it.
There are many ways to learn about our history. Some do it by reading books or visiting historic sites. As Channel 2's Robin Young tells us now, some local high school students are learning about the Underground Railroad in an unusual way.
So glad I'm here. So glad I'm here.
Stitch by stitch, these Lafayette High School students are piecing together quilts, learning about color combinations, embroidery, and such. But this quilt means much more.
Sun up to sundown, chains and shackles, no more auction block for me.
When runaway slaves came through Buffalo and other Underground Railroad cities, most unable to read or write, they needed help along the way. So they kept an eye out for freedom quilts, which these students are recreating.
I just thought it was going to be some easy project, and I didn't really think it had a meaning to it. But now that we have studied over it and I've seen what my ancestors had to go through, I kind of like it. I kind of like the idea of it. They call it the road to freedom.
I can pray this prayer.
These symbols were signs along that road, telling runaways to follow bear tracks over mountains, which homes would hide them, when to change their clothes to blend in. Perhaps the most anticipated, the Crossroad Symbol.
When you saw that hang over a fence, you would know that you were at the crossroads, that you were just a couple inches from the border of Canada, that you were so close to freedom and you're right there.
It just makes me realize that I take for granted that I didn't have to go through any of this, and that I already have freedom and I didn't have to go anywhere or memorize any symbols or anything like that.
How did they learn about the symbols? Listen to this poem, memorized years ago by people with hearts full of hope.
Monkey wrench turns the wagon wheel towards Canada. On a bare paws trails to the crossroads. Once you get to the crossroads, you dig a log cabin on the ground. Shoe fly tell you to dress up.
These students are generations away from the long road to freedom, but are learning to appreciate the struggle through needle and thread.
So glad I'm here.
Robin Young, Channel 2 News, Buffalo.
Those quilts served a dual purpose. After helping to teach kids, they were donated to area hospitals to provide comfort to the sick. Well, that is Juneteenth, a celebration of freedom. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed learning the story of Juneteenth, how a Union general brought the belated news of emancipation to Galveston, Texas. The date, June 19, 1865. Don't forget, this year's Juneteenth celebration is Saturday and Sunday, June 17th and 18th in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Park on Best Street in Buffalo. From all of us here at Channel 2, thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the Juneteenth celebration.